Well, hello, boys and girls. It's when we feel like at o'clock again. I'm Pearl of Wisdom, and we got another special guest, killer guest here today. It's John from Off the Wall Hockey. And if you don't know, I don't know how you don't know. Everybody in the land knows John. But if you happen to not know, I'd go check over his channel, man. It's fun stuff. He does trivia, he does a lot of live stuff. He just did a Rangers and Edmonton thing today. He was talking about like Edmonton's goaltending and how the Rangers are probably the most best position to be like probably a I would say next 10 years could be if they can pay
Absolutely.
these guys the right way. They look fantastic. So, anyways, I reached out to him because I like stuff and I like doing this split screen, talk back and forth stuff, as you know. Just did something with Jamie Basco from the Philadelphia Flyers yesterday, an insider writer. You go check that out as well. But we're going to have a lot of fun today with the Montreal Canadiens. John is a Boston fan, so I thought, let's get together and slam the Canadiens, which I don't think you can do anything but.
Nothing better.
I don't think you can do anything but with the team that they have right now. So, what do we do here? What do we do here for Montreal, John? I mean, I'm looking up in this lineup, and I don't even know. I don't even know where to go. Where do we start? What do we do?
Well, thank you for having me. Really happy to be on. So, and I'm glad you enjoy my channel. That's awesome. So, thank you very much, man. Montreal, what a mess. Just Montreal is the kind of team that I look at and go, they are the definition of stuck in the middle. They're the definition of mediocrity. Similar in a lot of ways to where the Minnesota Wild are at right now, where they're not good enough to be a playoff team. I think Minnesota is in a little bit better position than Montreal is, but they're one of those teams that they're not good enough to be a playoff team, particularly Montreal in this division, where you can pretty much chalk up those top three spots to Boston, Tampa Bay, and Toronto. It's hard to make the playoffs if you're not one of those three teams in this division. So they're not at that level, but they're not down with LA and Detroit and Anaheim and San Jose and these bottom teams who are at least getting top 5 draft picks out of this. And you can look at and say, if they load up on good draft picks now, 4 or 5 years down the road, they're going to be good again. They are stuck right in the middle of not being good enough to be good, but not being bad enough to be worth being bad. And that's not a good position to be in for any team in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you there. And not to mention the fact that they basically got into this position by drafting horribly up until now. I think you said you look back and that the last good draft they had was in 2007 with McDonough and Pacioretty. Well, that's a heck of a long time ago for one. And then they screwed up the McDonough acquisition anyways by trading him for Gomez. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I have Montreal's first round draft picks pulled up here. 2019, they drafted 15th overall, and they got Cole Caulfield, who we don't know yet. I mean, there's a chance he becomes a good player. We don't know yet. He's just a kid. 2018, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, 3rd overall. And this pick was a reach when it happened. I hated this pick when they made it. 3rd overall for Kotkaniemi. He got rushed to the NHL, forced to play right away, and this past season had to be sent down to the AHL because he was struggling so much. That is not what you want to be doing with your young players. 2017, they drafted Ryan Poehling in the first round. Again, a little early. We don't really know yet. He's got potential. 2016, Mikhail Sergachev traded away for Jonathan Drouin, sent off to Tampa Bay. Drouin has been okay. He hasn't been great. He certainly hasn't been the kind of player that elevates Montreal from where they would be to being that much better with him. Sergachev's turned out to be a pretty solid offensive, not even just offensive, but two-way defenseman in Tampa Bay. I think if they could redo that, they'd probably keep Sergachev. Noah Juleson, he's had injury problems. It's early. He's only played 44 career games. He was their 2015 first round pick. 2014, they drafted Nikita Sherbak. He went off to Russia. He played 37 NHL games, off to Europe, gone, not playing, in the even in pro hockey in North America anymore. 2013, they drafted Michael McCarron, pretty much a career AHLer. He's only played 69 NHL games. 2012, third overall, they drafted Alex Galchenyuk. He had one good year and has bounced around since then. He's gone from Montreal to Arizona. He's gone to Pittsburgh. Now he's in Minnesota. He's a huge bust for a top 5 draft pick. 2011, Nathan Beaulieu has turned out to be a pretty solid depth defenseman. He's with the Winnipeg Jets now. They didn't keep him. And he's actually turned out to be a solid bottom pair type guy. 2010 was Jared Tenorti, who has pretty much been a career AHLer. He played a little bit at the NHL level this year with Nashville, but he's only played 81 NHL games. He's pretty much been an AHL guy. 2009 was Louis LeBlanc, who only played 50 games and was out of the league. 2008, they didn't have a first-round pick, and that brings us all the way back to 2007, where they got Ryan McDonough and Max Pacioretty in the first round, and then PK Subban in the second round. That was their last good draft. 2007, 13 years ago, was their last good draft.
Yeah. And it's not just the drafting, I think more than the drafting. And you can say that's the case for everybody. It's the player development. It's just a very poor player development system that they have.
Absolutely.
What you mentioned about Kotkaniemi, I mean, that kid was lean looking. Like, I know he has the skills and everything, but bro, do you not understand the game? This kid is not strong enough to be in the league. Now what happened was he gets injured, right? Obviously, yep. He's not big enough to be in the league. He gets injured. He goes down. Then they put him down in the AHL this year. He puts up some points, but he's playing perimeter hockey now because he's scared to go into those zones where you need to score because he's been hurt. Like, he's too young. These guys are going to keep on going back and playing, and they're going to do what the coach tells them. But in the back of their mind is like, I'm in pain every day, And then that works on the conscience, and you're like, do I even want to do this anymore?
Yeah.
And that's what kills these young players.
You can damage a young player's mentally more so than physically by rushing them to the NHL and not letting them properly develop. And I think Kotkaniemi is a great example of someone who I didn't like the pick to begin with. Taking him third overall was way too high. We know Montreal was desperate for a center, and that's why they made that pick. They were desperate for a center, and they, no matter what, they were picking a center with that pick. But you look at Brady Tkachuk went the pick after him. And you look at, Brady Tkachuk is a big, physical young player coming out of college who was NHL ready and could handle the physicality. And, I mean, we've seen it in his 2 years with Ottawa that, I mean, he is not afraid to get involved, and he can play at the NHL level. And he I think, is going to be an extremely good power forward for a long time in this league. He goes the pick after Kotkaniemi, and they should have just taken the wing. They should have just taken the winger, because what you have now with Kotkaniemi is someone who is rushed to the NHL, not allowed to develop properly, now has had injury problems, now has had their confidence completely shaken. I mean, when you're a young player, if you make the NHL right away, that's incredible. That is awesome. But then to get sent down after that is, I mean, talk about regression and going the wrong way. They should have at least given him another year of development before they thought about bringing him up to the NHL. And he's played 115 NHL games. He's got 17 goals and 25 assists for 42 points.
Yeah. He wasn't ready.
He wasn't NHL ready, and they just threw him in because they desperately needed a center. And that may have screwed him up long term now.
Could. And you know what? It's actually a testament to him that he did as well as he did with how small and unphysically prepared he was to be in the league. He could have been something really special. He reminded me like of a Mikko Koivu type, second line center that can play both ways if he would have been given enough time.
Yep.
But now he may be lucky to make it in the league. Seriously, he probably will come back from this, but probably never be as good as he could have been. I'm glad they didn't take Philip Zadina, because they would have probably played him right away, and he was even less ready physically. That's why he dropped a bit. And then they would have, Zadina would have been in big trouble, because as far as I understood in that draft, he was not as intellectually and emotionally mature as Kokoniemi was. So that could have been an absolute disaster. Fortunately for him, he went to Detroit. They've been slow with him, and he looks like he's going to be a pretty darn good player in the league in the long run. But yeah, I agree. His Montreal, whatever you do, and I think we were talking before this, whatever they do, what do you figure? They really just rip that front office apart, or what do you figure?
I mean, they're in such a situation now. I think if I were the GM, if I'm looking at Montreal right now, I am stripping this team down, and I'm not trying to do a Edmonton Oilers Buffalo Sabres rebuild where it takes 8-10 years to get it done, but I am trying to do something like what Boston did in that 2015, 2016, those couple years where they were going from cup contender, then they had a couple of rough years, and then they get Pastrnak and they get McAvoy and they get these young guys, Carlo, who come in and play well, and all of a sudden within 2 or 3 years they're right back being a cup contender again. If I'm Montreal, I am trying to take a couple years, get these young players ready to go, and come back in 3 years and be, a contending team in the East. They're not going to contend with this group unless they can really go out. And I mean, they've got multiple holes in this lineup. They don't have anyone that's really dynamic offensively. They don't have that elite high-level goal scorer. I mean, you look at their best offensive players, you're looking at Brendan Gallagher and Max Domi. Those are good players and guys that I like a lot, but they're not David Pastrnak. They're not Austin Matthews. They're not Mitch Marner. They're not going to go out and score you 100 points on the season. They don't have that kind of player offensively. And when you look at their defense core, it is Shea Weber and a whole bunch of depth guys. And they don't have a legitimate top 4 defense. They have Shea Weber, who is clearly your number one and under a ton of pressure right now to perform and be the best player that he can be, because after him, you've got a whole bunch of depth guys. I mean, Jeff Petrie is good offensively. He can be absolutely brutal in his own zone at times. Alzner literally got waived to the minors not that long ago. Ben Sherratt, solid player, but he's a bottom pair defenseman. Brett Kulak, bottom pair defenseman. Christian Folin, depth guy. That defense core, I think, is the biggest problem of all with this team.
Yeah, and there's nobody in the minors right now to Cale Fleury. They're playing him up more than you probably should. Noah Juulsen's injured. We don't know what he's going to look like. He looked like he was going to be good before he got injured, but they're like, for me, the only thing holding this team together is Price.
Yeah.
And really, you got Caden Primo there. You can't do that. But I'm finding if you can't find a home for Price, you almost got to hope he goes to Seattle. And you got to rebuild. You got to do one or the other. Like, you got $20 million in cap space right now. And a very weak free agent market out there. The best you could find is Dadonov, maybe, if you can convince a guy like Dadonov to come in. But is that really solving your problems overall? I don't see it. You need, like you said, there's so many holes. You need about 4 or 5 more guys on this lineup to even come close to thinking about competing with Boston, Toronto, and stuff like that. You can try to do a quick rebuild here, but I'm not sure it's possible. Jonathan Drouin, maybe, you hold on to him and see if he can become the better player than he can be. Thomas Tatar, what do we need him at 29 years old? Gallagher, love him, but it's almost a shame he's on this team. Eh, I'm trading. I'm sorry, but I think they've needed to do a teardown for a long time. And okay, nobody wants to do 7-8 years. Nobody wants to do that. You can add free agents as necessary. There's ways to build up your team as fast as you possibly can, but I don't see veterans here that we want to keep, except for maybe Brendan Gallagher, because you need to keep some guys to say, this is the template we want our young players to be. But besides that, I'm with you. Like, nobody wants to do that kind of a teardown, but I'm afraid that they don't really have much of a choice, because if you're going to do a quick rebuild here, you really can't have Price there. Price puts you in it.
Price's contract, I mean, what they're paying him per year at $10.5 million a year, that takes a good chunk of your cap space right there. And I mean, Carey Price is a very good goaltender. He is not the goaltender that he was 5-6 years ago. He's not the kind of guy who's gonna just absolutely steal games like that night in and night out anymore. He's 32 years old. At 32, we've seen what Marc-Andre Fleury has done since going to Vegas, where he was a 30-plus goaltender changing teams, and he's played extremely well with Vegas. So I don't think Carey Price is done or anything like that, but this is a guy who's 32 years old. He's not going to, reach some other level higher than what he's already been. You've got probably another 3 to 4 years of a very, very good Carey Price. And then you're going to start to see the Henrik Lundqvist, Pekka Rinne type of decline as he gets into his late 30s, because there's no way to not have that. That's what happens when you get older. You're not that level of player anymore. I mean, if they could, I don't know if there's a team out there that would take Price's contract. I mean, he is signed for a long time still, and $10.5 million cap hit for a goaltender is a lot. We saw Bobrovsky get $10 million a year from Florida this past offseason, and he was terrible this year. His goals against was well over 3. His save percentage was, I think it was either right at 900 or slightly below. He was horrendous in his first year with Florida. Does a team want a 32-year-old Carey Price at $10.5 million per season?
And does Montreal want him if we're going to do a quick rebuild like this? Right? Because at 35 years old, you don't. You're not going to need him. So they're in a very difficult place. They got to do one or the other. And really, I've been thinking about this since we said we were going to do Montreal. If you have no choice but to keep Price, I suppose the only thing you can do is just grab as many free agents as possible and cross your fingers. That's really all you can do. If you can find a taker for Carey Price, and off the top of my head, I'm not really sure. You mentioned Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky really showed, as far as I'm concerned, just how amazing Tortorella's system is and how great coach he actually is. He made them look a lot better than he was. Carey Price has played very well. You just mentioned they have one defenseman.
Yep.
The fact that he keeps a 3.00 and somewhere around a 0.900 save percentage and shooting percentage, is actually a testament to the fact that he is a great goaltender, because they've got such a poor defense. I think there might be a team that might do it. They might have to, since you're going to rebuild anyways, take $2 million of his contract or whatever the next little while. Somebody will probably pay $8 million for it.
Yeah.
You're not going to get much in return. The thing I've been thinking of is maybe a team like Seattle, that he's from Vancouver, right? It could give him an opportunity to go start fresh. They see what Fleury did over there with that expansion team. You never know. You might be able to do it here. And let's start this rebuild. Once you get rid of Price, you really have no choice but to rebuild after that. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things with Montreal, though, is are they as an organization willing to accept that they need a rebuild? Because you really, the past 3 years, you could say, Montreal has needed to kind of strip things down and go into rebuild mode here, and they won't. Mark Bergevin, the GM, the team, the organization will not go into rebuild mode. They seem to think that they're just a couple players away from competing with teams like Boston, Toronto, and Tampa Bay. And I don't know. You would have to catch a very, very good year for that to happen. Again, the Ford group, I could see them piecing together. If they could add a couple more scorers, I think they could piece together a Ford group that could probably be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. Tatar had a really good season this year. I think if he can produce at a 25 to 30 goal rate, you're good. I'm a big fan of Brendan Gallagher. He is my favorite player on Montreal.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm a huge fan of Brendan Gallagher. I really like Max Domi. He wasn't as good offensively this year as he was the year before, but I think with his style of play and just his attitude, I think Domi is a great guy to have down. Probably I'd play him at center there. Philip Deneau, not a number one center, not a top guy. I think they're still missing that elite top center. They don't have that number one center. I think Domi would be a really good two. I think Deneau is a number two. They don't have a real number one center. They're lacking goal scoring up front, but Tatar, Gallagher are going to give you goals. Paul Byron is kind of one of those good depth guys for like a third line role. If Jonathan Drouin could get his act together and produce like a top 10 draft pick, there's a top line winger. And then maybe you go out and you get a guy like Mike Hoffman or Dadonov, or maybe even you go after Taylor Hall. You go after Taylor Hall and try and bring some level of goal scoring in. That's just the forward group. Trying to fix this defense is, I see a lot more hope in the forward group than I do in the defense core. The forwards, I think they could kind of put together a playoff level forward group with free agents. Defensively, though, that's a whole other ball game to even try to get into.
Yeah, and the problem with Montreal is their tax situation. And with all the guys you mentioned there, sure they can add guys, but where's the grit? Gallagher's got grit, but he's small. Like the whole team, Tatar, Domi, Deneau. There's no grit on that team at all. Like they don't have the size to play in the playoffs if they ever could make the playoffs. They probably need more scoring. And defensively this year, what are you going to get? Justin Schultz, maybe? Sammy Vatanen, maybe? You're basically just putting yourself more in a situation where you're barely making the playoffs or just making the playoffs again with anybody you're going to add in the free agent pool this year with what you got. So for my money, I don't know what they're going to do. It seems like they have an ownership that doesn't want to go through a rebuild. That's my guess.
I agree with that.
I'm not an insider, but that's my guess.
I agree with
So
that.
I guess the ownership is just going to have to live with mediocrity for now, because I personally can't see how they can improve this team enough through free agents, unless you said maybe you get a guy like Hall. I doubt Hall will want to go to Montreal. He's a Western boy. But they need either that, or they need to find some lightning in a bottle. Like maybe Kevin Shattenkirk, give him a couple million, see what he can do, or Zach Bogosian, see if you can build at least get a lot of 3-4 defensemen like Zach Bogosian, which I don't even consider a 3-4, but maybe he can up his game. Middle of the road guys that can, at least so you have, like, you don't have the number one and number two besides Weber, but you have some stability, like, and then like you said, a Hoffman or whatever, and hope your depth gets you there. But as far as I'm concerned, this team needs totally redone.
Yeah, I think, Shattenkirk, I think, would be, he had a great year this year with Tampa Bay. And that's a guy who I thought was done. After the way he played with the New York Rangers, I thought he was done. And he came back and had a huge bounce back year with Tampa Bay this year. Now, how much of that is Kevin Shattenkirk and how much of that is playing in Tampa Bay, where you have arguably the most stacked roster in the league? But Shattenkirk's an interesting. I think you could put him in a pair with Shea Weber, or you could put him on your second pair. You have another veteran guy there, so you have Weber on your first pair, Shattenkirk kind of anchoring your second pair, and then maybe you let some of the, Petrie's probably your number 4 at that point, and then maybe you let one of the younger guys play, like a Mete or a Juleson, play with Weber, and they get to learn from Shea Weber. And they can kind of have a little bit of that pressure taken off of them because, I mean, you've got someone who still is one of the best defensemen in the NHL and Shea Weber playing next to you. Similar to what Boston has done with, they've put a lot of their young defensemen next to Zdeno Chara, and that's taken the pressure off of them and just kind of allowed them to play their game, develop. And we've seen how Brandon Carlo's turned out. He's had, I mean, this past season, Carlo absolutely exploded to be a high-level defensive defenseman. And Charlie McAvoy currently plays with Chara, and he's looked at as someone who's going to be a future number 1 defenseman for the Bruins. So I think playing a young guy with Weber and then having a guy like Shattenkirk to anchor that second pair, you put Petrie with Shattenkirk, and you could be in an okay position at that point.
It's getting better. Well, we better finish her up here because I don't think we're going to solve the Montreal Canadiens in another 5 minutes, but
no, probably not. No.
But I love what you had to say, bud. It's great listening to you again. Everybody, Off the Wall Hockey. You just heard how much this guy knows about the game. He can pull any team up there and talk about him, and I love listening to him. It's a lot of fun over there as well. Plus, you got a Patreon as well, right?
Yes.
So you might want to check that out as well. He's got a Patreon. He does live stuff on there as well. And it's lots of fun. It's cheap. It's like $1.50, right? Mm-hmm. Something like that. Yeah. So, yeah, I loved having you. We got to go now. Hit the subscribe and the bell on my channel, too. Don't just pay attention to the guys we have on here. You love me, too. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Great talking.
Oh, I loved having you, bud.
Awesome.